Hey, welcome to this week's Table Talk podcast. It's Caleb. I'm joined by David on Tuesday morning. You guys are getting this on Thursday. We're here on Tuesday. It's a little cloudy outside. Looked a little dreary on the way in this morning, but hopefully it'll get better the rest of the day, David.
Yep. Yeah, it's rainy and nasty, and it's been like that all day this day. And
Like 40 days?
It's like, I know, 40 days,
Yeah.
hopefully not. But it sometimes feels like that when it's these days. So, but we can't complain too much. We're in a building.
That's right.
And it doesn't really affect us at all, other than a minor inconvenience.
Other than it just affects my mood when it's raining outside.
Yeah, that's true.
Other than that.
But at least we don't have to be out in it.
At least we don't have to build a boat and put animals on it.
That's true.
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite stories were in this series, right? Mm-hmm. Genesis. Well, the series is version 1.0.
Yeah.
But we're talking about Genesis, and we've worked our way through creation in the fall, and this one is maybe one of the most famous stories.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Noah's Ark and the flood that came and destruction, and you covered that on Sunday, and I thought you did a great job with that. But before we get into that, I wanted to just throw a little question out there. Okay. If we were getting on the ark today, it's rainy, God tells you to get on this ark, what 2 items would you take with you? And let me preface this. No, like, you can take your Bible, you can take all your Christian stuff with you. So it doesn't have to be a Christian answer. So because I was like, maybe I got to take my Bible.
Yeah.
That's already on the ark.
Okay, perfect.
Something
we have a supply of those.
Yes.
Okay. Coffee pot.
Great answer.
Absolutely. And I'm going to assume that comes with coffee. That's a bundle package for me.
Sure. Okay.
I'm going to assume that. The second thing, probably like a crossword puzzle book or a coloring, something that you will not get bored with.
Yeah.
Because if you're on there for, you don't know how long it's going to be. If you take one book, I don't want to read the same book over and over again. So maybe like some type of, or a guitar. A guitar might work too. Something that will stimulate your mind
That was
while
going to
you're
be
on
mine.
there. Yeah.
That was going to be mine. I would take my guitar. If you're taking your guitar, I'll bring the mandolin.
Perfect.
And
we're good.
Then we can swap back and forth, and then we can get really good on it.
Have a little band.
Yeah. A thought that went through my mind was like a good pillow.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that seems, it'd be tough. You know what I mean? If I have to sleep on hay or something like that. But I don't know that that's like a necessity. I'll go with it.
I think it's good.
I'll go with a pillow and a guitar. What would I do? I don't know. That would be tough. So
What would your job be on the ark? Is that what you're saying?
Well, sure. I was going to say like my activities.
Oh,
like
what
you
would you
had
do?
that.
Yeah.
So if the Bible's already on there, I'll just keep reading that over and over and over again. But like, it would get pretty monotonous.
It would get very boring.
So a crossword puzzle or something like that would be
I don't know why I said crossword puzzle. That seems boring too. And I'm like, I got to have something, I would get bored of hearing myself play guitar too.
Yeah.
I think just it would be boring in general.
Yeah. It would. Yeah. I mean, you do have animals abundantly there. It's like, okay, well, I can go and play with
the rhino again. It's the third time this week. Yeah, it would get boring.
Yeah, it would. That's true. It's like going to the zoo every day. And then not just going to the zoo, it's like working at the zoo.
Yeah.
Except for way worse.
Because
it stinks.
Listen, I love zoos. I really do. But I don't understand like how people are like zoo people all the time.
Yeah.
It's like the tiger's still there, man. Like he's just laying there. He's not doing anything.
Now throw one of those gazelles in that tiger thing.
I'd watch that. Yeah, I would watch that for sure.
We're talking about gladiators for animals. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
Like, this is not entertaining.
I would watch it.
So, no, that's good. I thought you did a great job with your sermon. You talked about the flood and kind of the overarching meaning of it and judgment and God's why God did it and what the purpose was. And so I thought you did a really good job.
Thanks.
Do you want to kind of give an overview or a little bit of that information on the story? I think most people listening probably know the story.
Yeah.
but maybe just an overview of kind of what you talked
Yeah,
about.
I mean, the flood's like a complicated story. It's because it's one where God literally floods the earth. Nothing survives other than Noah and his family and the animals on the ark. So that is hard to wrestle with a little bit. But I think when you kind of blow it up and look at the big picture, it may not necessarily resolve all of our questions, but it at least gives us reasons. God created the world good. He created us to enjoy the world with him and alongside him and to create alongside him, and sin messed that up. And what you see is sin continues to corrupt and destroy God's creation. It starts with Cain murdering Abel in Genesis 4. After that, Lamech takes 2 wives. He murders someone else. Violence and bloodshed has continued to take over the earth. There's this line in Genesis 6 about the spiritual beings reproducing with human women, and there's a race called the Nephilim that apparently existed for a while, and it's just like this. Things have gotten out of control, basically. And so by the time we reach Genesis 6 and the story of Noah, God's heart is cut. God is brokenhearted. God is grieved. He's sorry that he's made humans. And I think that changes the perspective a little bit. It's not as if God is so just ticked off. He's like, I'm going to wipe them out. God's heart is so broken at how bad things have gotten that he decides to essentially start over. And that's the mercy and the judgment part together. The judgment part is God says, okay, this has to stop. Things have gotten out of hand. The mercy part is I'm not giving up on humanity yet. And so it ties into the idea that God's judgment and God's mercy are always hand in hand. Even throughout the rest of the scripture, I think Noah's Ark kind of provides this template, this framework of what the rest of the Old Testament story specifically looks like, where there is consequence and judgment on the people for their departure from God or on their departure from the law. But there's always this promise of mercy and redemption. And every time that they are let go, God removes his hand from them. At some point, he redeems and restores. And ultimately, we see that in Jesus. So the flood story is, it helps us understand a part of who God is. And it also, I believe, kind of serves as a framework for what we see later on in the Bible.
Very good. Yeah, I think this is a struggle that a lot of people have with faith, is the idea of like, man, how the judgment of them, the judgment on Canaan, and things like it's a hard thing that we have to wrestle with. Why is there pain? Why is there suffering? Why would God destroy all of these people? And in our minds, I think we hear it and we go, "Oh, they're just innocent people." But I don't think any of us are innocent,
Right?
And so we all deserve that. None of us really want what we deserve. A lot of times we'll say, "Well, why doesn't God take away sin?" And we go, "Well, if God took away sin, He would destroy all of us again, because we all have that. We all have sin. We've all fallen, and so." We want God's grace and mercy. Sometimes we don't want it for ourselves, we may not want it for others.
Yeah.
We don't want grace and mercy for others. We look at their sin and go, well, look at them, and then we get to ours and we go, well, ours,
Right, that's a little different.
Yes, and so I think probably if we saw the things that they were doing as a culture, as what the world was doing, sacrificing children to Molech and all the sins that were just abounding, then I think we would go, this is awful. Why isn't God doing anything about this? But then it's easy to go, well, why did God do that?
Right.
So
Well, yeah, I mean, you want a God of justice. We often don't want a God of justice for ourselves, right? Like you said, but I think if we truly want to see good in the world, then we want God to be just, and God is perfectly just. And I believe the reason God can be perfectly just is because God is perfect love, and He is able to rightly discern everything. And so, God's act of judgment, I believe, is also an act of love, because He is ridding the world of the things that hurt and harm people. sin, we talked about this Sunday a little bit, sin is not just this kind of moralistic right-wrong to-do list, right? I mean, there is some of that, right? I mean, if God just said, hey, jump that fence because I said so, we go, okay, I'm going to do it because you said so. But sin isn't just like this box list we check off. It's about what contributes, positively to God's created world and to God's created people, and what hurts and harms them. And so it's what hurts and harms others and what hurts and harms ourselves. That's really sin. Sin is this idea of missing the mark. God set this idea when we talk about wholeness. It's like, what does a whole person look like? Well, it looks like Jesus ultimately, but that's what God designed us for. And when we miss the mark, the Bible calls that sin. And sin is both this force that holds us captive, which Jesus died to liberate us from and break its power, because the wages of sin is death. As sin holds us captive, it drives us to the grave. Jesus' death and resurrection breaks that curse. But sin's also a verb, and that's the words and actions and thoughts that we take that contribute to that corrupting force that hurts and harms the world. So those things that hurt and harm are not good. And so who would God be if God sat back and did not do something to erase those things? And so the flood was one instance of him doing that. And like you said, we don't know what was happening, but we know that the author of Genesis tells us that every inclination of the human heart was evil, which is a level of darkness in the world we've not experienced. And God, in his perfect wisdom, love, and justice, knew what was best at the time. God one day, again, will rid creation of all sin and evil, and darkness and pain. And so, that is coming again. Not in the same way, because God promised he would never flood the earth again. But I do believe there is a day of the Lord coming, as the Old Testament calls it, where when Jesus returns, sin will be dealt with, and it will be punished. And not just, this is where I think the distinction lies, because sometimes we only think of sin as the things that we do. We think that judgment is solely reserved for us. There is judgment for us. We're saved by faith, by grace through faith in Christ. That's what gets us out of that. But sin itself will be judged. Death itself will be judged. And Revelation tells us they're cast away, right? They will be destroyed. I'm going on a very long rant here, but I think what we see in Genesis, and particularly in the flood story, is the idea that sin decreates and devalues what God has declared good. God cannot let that go undealt with, but there's always mercy on the other side. He will redeem, he will restore for all those who put their faith in him.
Yeah, I think what you were saying before kind of echoes a lot of what we learned in children's ministry this week. We talked about the flood and destruction, but then we talked about how it's a picture of Jesus. Jesus is like the ark, the physical boat. It's a picture of Jesus, and there's all types of typology in that, the type of the pitch that they used, and that's the same stuff that was used in Moses' basket, and there's just all these things, but there's one door into the ark. Yeah. Moses goes out and he preaches, and he says, "There's a storm coming. There's a storm. Make sure you're prepared. Come with us. This is open. Come join us." And the people who chose to get on the boat with Noah, I almost said Moses, with Noah.
I know what you meant.
With Noah, they were saved from that storm. God rescued them. He rescued his creation. Yeah, and it's in a beautiful analogy of Christ. It's like, hey, we go out, we try to tell people, come get on this boat. Jesus is there's only one way, and he will save us from this storm, from this judgment that's coming. He's making it available to you. So just come and get on it. And God closes the door. It's all him. He does the work. But we get to be a part of that, like Noah was. We got to be a part of this story, not because he was perfect. He says he was righteous, but that doesn't mean he was without sin. Right. So he preached and did what God called him to do here on this earth. But it was through God that he was saved, and it was through Jesus. And Jesus is this picture of the ark, of the saving from the storm, and then coming back to something new.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful type, like you said, which is a theological term that really says something in the Old Testament that refers to Jesus or something in the New Testament. I mean, it is a beautiful picture of that. Tim Keller would call Jesus the true and better ark. And so much of the Bible functions that way. What we see in the Old Testament is just a foretaste or a glimpse of what we see Jesus ultimately do for us.
All over Moses, Joshua, Elijah, all of these things just foreshadowing and just types of Christ in these Old Testament, but none of them fulfill. Judges, the whole book of Judges is these guys that lead and bring people back to God, and they go, oh, great, everybody's following God again, but then they die and they fail, and it's like, okay, we need a better Noah. We need a better Moses. We need a better Joshua. We need a judge that won't die, that saved us from this world, but he won't die. He won't let us down because he will live forever.
Yeah.
And it's just these pictures over and over and over again.
Yeah. And this is, it seems like a lot of times in churches, like people, tend to swing like a pendulum one way or the other. Some people only talk about God's judgment. People only talk about God's grace. And yet both exist at the same time. Yeah. And I think they're interwoven together. Jesus, John tells us, is full of grace and full of truth. So he's 100% grace, 100% truth. That's a math equation we can't fulfill because we're not Jesus, but he can. And so, again, I think sometimes though we've used the idea of God's judgment as this like threatening, angry, whatever. And it's like, does God have anger at sin? Absolutely. Why? Because it hurts his people. Yep. God's anger towards sin is not because he's some big bully in the sky who's mad we didn't play the rules of his game right. Yep. God hates sin because sin hurts people. Yep. And so I think when we can understand that, it changes our point of view, it changes our reference, and then it becomes something where judgment then is not something to be afraid of, but in some ways it's something to be welcomed. Yeah. And this gets into bigger pictures, but the New Testament uses this language a lot of like of a refining fire. There are times I think where God may refine us through fire in life. Yeah. That may feel like discipline or consequence or judgment at the time. But what ultimately I believe God is trying to work out is how do we grow stronger? How does he forge a deeper faith in us? How does he forge us to be more like him? That view of judgment, I actually think is a beautiful thing. Yeah. Now, at some point, that opportunity for being forged and formed when Jesus returns, that sort of goes away. Yeah. There is a time coming where people will have to decide, am I with him or not? Yeah. And we don't know when that day is, so we need to be with him now. Yeah. But this is such a big topic that means a lot to me because I think our misunderstanding of this has hurt so many people. Yeah. And has ran so many people off and away from faith. Yep. But rightly understanding it, I think, helps us fall in love with God more. Yeah. Because God is a God of justice and God is a God of grace. And those two things walk hand in hand more than we often can see. Yeah.
And I think we can only get close to it because of him.
Absolutely.
Because we've seen him do it. And we were having conversations before this about working through history and working out our faith and how the church has worked out his faith. And the only reason we can even get to that point where we try to balance those two is because we have a perfect Father who demonstrates that for us in a perfect way. Now we have to work on how do we balance it? Yeah. How do we make sure that we're speaking truth, and how do we make sure that we're being grace-filled and loving and kind and not, So I think it is something for us to run towards and to chase after and to try to get on.
Absolutely. I love Genesis. I love these stories. I love what they teach us about God. And, as we grow to know him more, I think he becomes more beautiful, even in the texts that are troubling, even in the texts we have to wrestle with, even in the texts that seem out of character, right? Because I think sometimes you can look and say, well, God's all loving, but then he did this. How's that? Well, if you dig in, I think we see how those two things go hand in hand. And the other truth of it is God is so much bigger than us. and God is so much wiser than us. And if we trust God's heart, I believe God doesn't do anything that is not ultimately rooted in love.
Yep.
And that seems like a mystery to us. And we trust Him.
Yep.
And I actually think it's a good thing that God is mysterious to us, because if we perfectly understood Him, He really wouldn't be that big or that powerful.
Yep. Exactly. And as we work through Genesis, we're going to see that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so what as we work through Genesis, what do we have coming next?
Yeah, so we're getting to Babel on Sunday. So we're really spending 4 weeks in the primeval history, Genesis 1 through 11, and then we'll spend 2 weeks with Abraham, a week with Jacob, a week with Joseph is kind of how the rest of this will go. So there's just not time to get everything in super detail, but we're spending 4 weeks in those first 11 chapters because those are really foundational pieces. But once we finish Babel on Sunday, we'll get into Abraham and some of the patriarchal characters later in the book. Babel's fun. I've never actually preached a sermon on Babel before. Newsflash, like we're going to end up in Acts 2, but
Nice.
that's because I think that's where the curse is undone.
Yeah, exactly.
At the day of Pentecost, which was coincidentally this past Sunday. If I would have thought about it, I would have timed that up a little bit better. But so we'll get into that on Sunday.
That sounds great. I think this has been a really good series, like you said, a foundational type series. The Tower of Babel has some really cool things, trying to force your way up to God, and so I'm excited to hear a sermon on that. I'm also excited to talk about it next week.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. This is fun stuff. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We will see you next week on the Table Talk podcast. Now, be sure to join us Sunday morning at 10:30, whether you're here in town or catch the service online, and we'll be right back here to talk about Babel and all things Genesis next Thursday. Have a great weekend.